The world had narrowed to a single, searing point of existence. There was no past, no future, only the tidal wave of now, cresting and crashing within me. The sterile, mint-green walls of the delivery room melted into a watercolor blur. The incessant, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the metronome to my agony. A sound I knew would be tattooed onto my memory forever. And through it all, there was Liam. His hand, large and warm, was a constant pressure on my lower back. His voice was a low, steady anchor in the hurricane. "You're doing it, Ilara. You're so strong. Just one more. Breathe with me, my love. Breathe." I clung to his words as if they were oxygen. For 9 months, his voice had been the soundtrack to this journey. It had narrated the chapters of our pregnancy books, whispered reassurances during bouts of morning sickness, and sung off-key lullabies to my swelling belly. Liam was my rock, my North Star. He was the calm, steady center of my universe. The man who had looked at me across a crowded coffee shop 5 years ago and made me believe in things like fate and forever. Our life was a carefully curated masterpiece of shared dreams. We'd met, fallen in love with a swift and breathless certainty, and built a life brick by brick. A small but charming house with a porch swing, a clumsy golden retriever named Gus, and a garden where we battled weeds and celebrated every small, sun-ripened tomato. The baby wasn't an accident. He was the final, perfect piece of the puzzle. The very cornerstone of the future we had so meticulously designed. Liam had been more excited than I was, if that was even possible. He'd assembled the crib with the focus of a bomb disposal expert, his brow furrowed in concentration, refusing to even look at the instructions. He'd painted the nursery a soft, buttery yellow, a color he called morning promise. He would spend hours in there, just sitting in the rocking chair, one hand resting on the empty cradle, a look of such profound, tender anticipation on his face that it made my heart ache with love. "He's going to have your eyes," he'd whisper, tracing the curve of my cheek. "And my terrible taste in music, probably. He's going to have your kindness," I'd reply, pressing a kiss to his temple. "That's all that matters." Kindness was the very essence of Liam. It radiated from him. He was the man who stopped to help people change a flat tire in the rain, who knew the names of all the baristas and mail carriers, who had once spent a whole weekend building a ridiculously elaborate ramp for a family of ducks to get in and out of a local pond. His family was the samia picture of wholesome, small-town decency. His parents sent us care packages and called every Sunday. His older brother, Mark, was his best friend. They were simple, good people. When I asked about his extended family, he'd always been a bit vague. "We're a small bunch," he'd say with a shrug. "Lots of distant cousins scattered about, you know how it is. We weren't ever that close." It seemed plausible enough. My own family was a sprawling, chaotic mess, and his quiet, contained lineage felt like a peaceful alternative. Now, in the crucible of childbirth, his kindness was my lifeline. The doctor's voice cut through my haze. "Okay, Ilara, on this next one. This is it. Give me everything you've got." I looked at Liam, my eyes wide with a mixture of terror and determination. He nodded, his own eyes shining. "You've got this," he mouthed. I bore down, a guttural scream tearing from my throat, a sound so primal I didn't recognize it as my own. It was a sound of creation, of a body being pushed beyond its limits. And then a sudden, shocking release. A slithering, wet rush, and the pressure that had consumed me for hours was gone. It was replaced by a new sound, a sound that sliced through the clinical hum of the room and rebooted my entire world. A cry. A thin, reedy, furious wail that was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. "He's here," the doctor announced, her voice bright with triumph. "He's perfect. Happy birthday, little man." Tears streamed down my face, mingling with the sweat. They were tears of relief, of exhaustion, of a love so immense and instantaneous it felt like my heart was physically breaking open to make room for it. Liam was crying, too, his face buried in my hair, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "We did it, Ilara," he choked out. "Oh my God, we did it." The nurses worked with swift, practiced efficiency, cleaning and swaddling our son. My son. The words felt foreign and yet more right than any words I had ever thought. He was real. He wasn't just a flutter in my belly or a fuzzy image on an ultrasound screen. He was a person. "Here's your boy, Mama," a kind-faced nurse said, her name tag reading Sarah. She gently placed the tightly wrapped bundle on my chest. He was so small, so impossibly fragile. His face was a scrunched-up, blotchy marvel. A dusting of dark hair, damp and fine, clung to his scalp. His tiny, wrinkled fists were clenched as if in protest at his rude eviction from the only home he'd ever known. I laid my hand over his little body, feeling the frantic hummingbird beat of his heart against my own. I was completely and utterly gone, lost in him. My son. Our son. Leo. We had chosen the name together. Leo for lion-hearted. After a few minutes, which felt like both a lifetime and a single second, I managed to tear my gaze away from him. I looked up at Liam, my face a mess of joyful tears, my smile so wide it hurt my cheeks. "Liam," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Look at him. Just look. Hold him." I started to shift the precious bundle towards him, my arms aching with the unfamiliar weight. But Liam didn't move. He stood frozen, a few feet from the bed, his hands hanging limply at his sides. The joyous, triumphant expression had vanished from his face. It was replaced by something I had never seen there before, a mask of chalky, hollowed-out terror. His skin was pale, his eyes wide and unfocused, fixed on the baby on my chest as if Leo wasn't a miracle, but a monster. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The warm, celebratory glow evaporated, replaced by a sudden, piercing chill. "Liam," I said, my voice wavering. The exhaustion was beginning to set in, and confusion was making my head swim. "What is it? Are you okay?" He swallowed, a dry, clicking sound in the sudden silence. The nurses had paused their tidying, their professional smiles faltering as they glanced between us. "Liam, come on," I urged gently, trying to inject some levity into my tone. "Don't be scared. He won't break." He took a shuffling, hesitant step forward, his movements stiff and robotic. He looked like a man walking towards an execution. Not his own, but someone else's. Someone he loved. "Honey, what's wrong?" I asked again, a thread of real fear now weaving its way through my post-birth euphoria. "You're scaring me." He didn't answer. He just stared at Leo, his breathing shallow. His gaze wasn't one of love, or awe, or even fear of fatherhood. It was something else. It was a look of horrified recognition. A look of profound, soul-deep grief. Sarah, the nurse, stepped forward cautiously. "Dad, are you feeling faint?" "It happens sometimes. It's a lot to take in." Liam shook his head, a tiny, jerky motion, never taking his eyes off our son. I'm fine," he rasped, but his voice was a ghost of its usual resonant baritone. "Then come hold your son," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. The hurt was a physical pang in my chest. This was supposed to be our moment. The three of us. The perfect, triumphant culmination of everything we had built. Why was he ruining it? Why was he looking at our beautiful boy like that? He finally reached the side of the bed. He still didn't reach for Leo. He just stood there, a statue of misery, his knuckles white where his hands were clenched at his sides. I could see the pulse beating frantically in his throat. "Liam, for God's sake," I pleaded, my voice breaking. "Please, say something." He finally looked at me. The love and adoration I was used to seeing in his eyes were gone. In their place was an abyss of guilt and despair so deep it terrified me. He looked broken. He looked like a stranger. He leaned down, his face close to mine. The familiar scent of him soap and faint. Clean sweat filled my senses, a stark contrast to the alien landscape of his expression. I thought he was going to kiss me. I thought he was going to apologize for his strange behavior, blame it on shock, and then finally take our son in his arms. Instead, he leaned closer to my ear, his lips brushing against my skin. The room, the nurses, the beeping machines, everything faded away until there was only his voice. A whisper so low it was almost devoured by the air. A secret meant only for me. A secret that would detonate my world. He didn't say, "I love you." He didn't say, "He's beautiful." He whispered 5 words, his voice cracking with a sorrow so absolute it felt ancient. "He has it too, Alara." I blinked. The words didn't compute. They were just sounds, meaningless syllables. "He has what?" I whispered back, confused. "A cold? What are you talking about?" He pulled back slightly, his eyes locking with mine. And in their tortured depths, I saw the truth. It wasn't a cold. It wasn't anything simple or fixable. It was a proper noun. A name. A monster I didn't know. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. And a single tear escaped his eye, tracing a path down his ashen cheek. "God, I am so sorry." And then I knew. My mind, in a flash of terrible, intuitive clarity, started connecting dots I hadn't even known were there. The vagueness about his family. A strange, offhand comment he'd once made about a family weakness. The time I found him staring at old photos with a bleakness he'd quickly hidden. The way his mother's voice sometimes held a strange, brittle quality on the phone. They had been tiny, insignificant details, meaningless static in the beautiful signal of our life. But now they converged. They weren't static. They were warnings. What? The word was a breath, a puff of air. "What does he have, Liam? What did you do?" The question hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. What did you do? Because his apology wasn't just for our son. It was for me. It was a confession. My heart, which had been swelling with love just moments before, felt like it was being squeezed by an icy fist. The joy drained out of me, leaving a cold, hollow vacuum in its place. The beautiful, perfect world we had built together. The world of the porch swing and the sun-ripened tomatoes and the nursery-painted morning promise, it all began to tremble. The foundation wasn't solid rock as I'd believed. It was sand, and the tide was coming in. What he said crushed every hope I had. The line from some forgotten, dramatic book I'd once read surfaced in my mind with hideous clarity. It was no longer melodrama. It was my reality. I looked down at the baby on my chest. My perfect boy. Leo. Lion-hearted. A sob, violent and raw, ripped through me. It wasn't a cry of joy or relief. It was a wail of utter desolation. The sound of a life breaking in two. "Alara? Mrs. Davison?" The nurse's voice was sharp with alarm now. But I couldn't hear her. All I could hear was Liam's whisper, echoing in my head, branding itself onto my soul. "He has it too." The "it" was a lie. A lie Liam had told not with words, but with his silence. A lie he had carried inside him through every kiss, every shared dream, every promise of forever. He had knowingly, willingly, walked me into this room, let me endure this beautiful agony, only to hand me not just a son, but a sentence. For both of us. My body began to shake uncontrollably. A violent, full-body tremor that had nothing to do with the aftermath of labor. It was the shockwave of betrayal. The nurse, Sarah, was at my side, her hands on my shoulders. "Alara, breathe. You're going into shock." "What did he say to you?" I couldn't answer. I couldn't form words. My gaze was fixed on Liam, who stood there, broken and guilty, the architect of my ruin. He had refused to hold our son not because he was scared, but because he couldn't bear to touch the evidence of his own unforgivable deception. He was looking at his legacy, a legacy of pain he had passed down, wrapped in a soft blue blanket. Everything I believed was a lie. Our love, his kindness, our perfect future. It was all a carefully constructed fiction, and he had just revealed the devastating final page. The beeping of the monitor beside me quickened its pace, becoming a frantic, high-pitched alarm. My vision tunneled. The mint-green walls rushed in, and the last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me whole was the face of my son. Our son, sleeping peacefully on my chest, utterly unaware that he had been born into the wreckage of a life that had ended the moment he'd taken his first breath. He was my greatest joy and my most profound sorrow, all in one tiny, perfect, doomed package. And I collapsed under the impossible weight of it all. I came back to the world in pieces. The first piece was sound the soft, rhythmic shushing of the bassinet wheels on the linoleum floor. The second was a sensation, a dull, throbbing ache low in my body, a physical echo of the cataclysm that had just occurred. The third was a smell antiseptic and faintly floral, the scent of a room trying to disguise its own grim purpose. And the fourth, the final and most devastating piece, was memory. He has it too, Alara. The whisper slithered back into my consciousness, and the fragile peace of my waking moment shattered. My eyes snapped open. The mint-green walls were no longer a blur. They were a cage. The soft lighting felt like an interrogation lamp. I was no longer in a delivery room, a place of miracles. I was at a crime scene. A nurse I didn't recognize was checking the drip in my arm. She smiled kindly when she saw my eyes were open. "Welcome back, Mrs. Davison. You gave us a bit of a scare. You fainted. It's not uncommon. Your body has been through an awful lot. An awful lot." The words were a bitter understatement that coiled in my stomach. I tried to speak, but my throat was a desert. My tongue felt thick and useless. "Here," the nurse said, already anticipating my need. She held a plastic cup with a straw to my lips. The cool water was a temporary balm, a brief distraction from the firestorm raging in my mind. My eyes scanned the room, a frantic, desperate search. The room was empty save for the nurse and me. No, not empty. My gaze landed on the clear plastic bassinet beside my bed. Inside, a tiny, perfect form was sleeping, one minuscule hand flung up by his head. "Leo, my son. The evidence. Where is he?" I finally managed to croak, the words scraping my throat raw. I didn't need to specify who he was. The nurse's gentle expression tightened with a flicker of professional caution. "Your husband stepped out to the waiting room to give you some space to recover. His parents are on their way." His parents. The wholesome, decent people who sent care packages. Were they in on it? Were they all part of this grand, cruel deception? The thought made me feel nauseous. A family of liars, raising a family of... What? What was it? "I want to see my baby," I said. My voice was stronger now, edged with a steely resolve that surprised me. The shock was receding, being replaced by something harder, colder. Rage. "Of course." The nurse wheeled the bassinet closer. "He's a beautiful, healthy boy, Alara. APGAR scores of 9 and 9. He's a little champion. Healthy." The word was a knife. Was he? Or was he a ticking time bomb, his perfect little body betraying him from the inside out? I reached out a trembling hand and laid it on his chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. His skin was softer than anything I had ever touched. He smelled of milk and innocence. A wave of love so fierce and primal washed over me that it almost brought me to my knees. It was a savage, protective love, a mother bear's love, sharp with claws and teeth. This tiny person was mine, and he had been wronged. We both had. I looked up at the nurse, whose name tag read Maria. Can you leave us alone for a few minutes? And can you tell my husband to come back in?" Maria hesitated. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" "I'm ready," I said, my voice flat. "I need to talk to him." She gave a small, compassionate nod and slipped out of the room. The silence that descended was heavy, suffocating. It was just me and my son, suspended in the awful quiet after the explosion. I talked to him, my voice a low murmur. "Hello, Leo. This Mama. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry this is how we're starting. But I'm here. I will always be here. I will fight for you. I promise you that." The door opened. Liam stood in the doorway, and the sight of him was physically painful. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. His face was gray and drawn, his eyes red-rimmed and hollowed out with a grief that was entirely of his own making. He had taken off his sweater, and his simple t-shirt was wrinkled, his hair disheveled. He looked like a man who had been wrestling with demons and lost. He took a tentative step into the room. "Elara, don't," I said. The word was quiet, but it stopped him dead in his tracks. "Don't come any closer." He flinched as if I had struck him. He stood by the door, his hands hanging uselessly by his sides, a portrait of guilt. "Elara, I can explain." "Can you?" I asked, my voice dripping with an icy venom I didn't know I possessed. "Can you really explain why you let me fall in love with a lie? Can you explain why you let me carry our son for 9 months, dreaming of a future that you knew was a fantasy? Can you explain why you stood here and watched me go through hell to bring him into this world, knowing you were hiding a knife behind your back?" Each question was a blow, and he visibly recoiled with each one. "It wasn't like that," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Then what was it like, Liam?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Tell me. I think you owe me that much. Tell me what it is. Say the words. Tell me the name of the monster you invited into our son's life." He closed his eyes, a pained expression twisting his features. He leaned his head back against the door, as if he didn't have the strength to stand. "It's called Caden Syndrome," he said, the name falling into the sterile air like a stone into a deep, dark well. "Caden Syndrome," I repeated, the syllables foreign and ugly on my tongue. "And what is Caden Syndrome?" He opened his eyes, and they were swimming with unshed tears. "It's genetic. It's in my family, on my father's side. That's why we were never close to them." He gave a hollow, mirthless laugh. "A small bunch," I said. "We're a small bunch because Caden's doesn't let you get old." My blood ran cold. "What does it do?" He swallowed hard, gathering himself. And then he began to speak, his voice low and monotone. Like a man reciting a catechism of damnation he had practiced 1,000 times in the dark. "It's a progressive neurodegenerative disease. It's carried on a dominant gene, which means if one parent has it, their child has a 50% chance of inheriting it." He paused, and the unspoken 50% hung in the air between us. Leo had lost the coin toss. My Uncle Caden was the first one diagnosed, back in the 70s. They named it after him. He was a musician, brilliant pianist. By the time he was 35, he couldn't remember the notes. By 40, he couldn't hold a fork. He died at 42, in a care home, not knowing his own name. I felt the bile rise in my throat. I looked at Leo's tiny, perfect hands, his fingers curled into a fist, and imagined them unable to hold a crayon, a baseball, a lover's hand. "My father," Liam continued, his voice thick with a lifetime of grief. "He started showing signs about 15 years ago. He was a carpenter, a master craftsman. Started small. He'd forget things. Where he put his keys, what he'd had for breakfast. My mom brushed it off as him just being absent-minded. But then he started making mistakes at work. He measured a board wrong and ruined an entire cabinet he'd been working on for weeks. He wept. I'd never seen my father weep before. He stared at a point on the far wall, his eyes seeing not a mint-green hospital room, but a memory. Then the physical stuff started. A tremor in his hands. He'd stumble sometimes. He started to get confused, angry. It changes your personality, Elara. It strips away everything you are, layer by layer, until all that's left is a scared, confused stranger in the body of the person you love. We watched him fade. For 10 years, we watched the kindest, most capable man I've ever known just evaporate. He's still alive. He lives in a facility upstate. My mom visits him every day. He hasn't known who she is in 3 years. The story was horrifying, a tragedy of epic proportions. And a small, traitorous part of me felt a pang of sympathy for the boy he must have been, watching his father disappear before his eyes. But that sympathy was immediately extinguished by the cold, hard fury of his betrayal. "And you knew," I stated. "It wasn't a question. You knew you might have it." He nodded, his face ashen. I got tested after Dad's diagnosis was confirmed. When I was 22. Before I ever met you. He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading. I'm a carrier, Elara. The doctor said that in my case, the gene's expression is likely to be late onset, like my father's. I might not show symptoms for another 10, 15 years. Or, he faltered. Or maybe never. Sometimes it skips a generation's full expression. But I carry it. And I can pass it on. The room was spinning. Every happy memory we'd ever shared was now tainted, rewritten by this monstrous secret. Our first date, when he'd been so charming and funny. Our wedding day, when he'd looked at me with such apparent love and promised to be honest with me forever. The night we decided to try for a baby. The joy on his face, all of it was a lie. A performance. Why? The word was barely a whisper. Why, Liam? Why would you do this to me? To us? To him? My voice broke on the last word, and I gestured helplessly towards the bassinet. He finally pushed himself off the door and took 2 steps into the room before stopping, respecting the boundary I had drawn. Because I was a coward, he said, his voice raw with self-loathing. Because I met you and, Elara, you were like sunshine. My whole life had been this gray, grim thing, living under the shadow of this curse. My mom was always sad. My dad was always worried, and I was just waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then I met you. You were so full of life and light, and you saw something good in me. You made me forget about the darkness. He ran a hand through his hair, his agitation palpable. I was so terrified of losing you. I knew if I told you the truth you'd leave. And you would have been right to leave. But I couldn't bear it. I loved you too much to let you go. So I buried it. I lied to myself. I told myself it was a small chance. 50%. Maybe it wouldn't happen. I prayed, Elara. I'm not a religious man, but I prayed every single night of your pregnancy that he would be spared. I told myself that maybe our love was strong enough to break the curse. Love. I spat the word out like it was poison. You don't get to use that word. That is not love. Love is honesty. Love is trust. Love is protecting the person you care about from harm, not leading them into it blindfolded. You didn't do this because you loved me. You did this because you were selfish. You wanted your perfect life. You wanted a wife and a child to prove to yourself that you were normal, that you weren't doomed. You used me. You used my body to roll the genetic dice, and you lost. And now our son, our innocent baby, has to pay the price for your cowardice. I was shouting now, the sound raw and ugly in the small room. Tears were streaming down my face, hot and angry. I didn't care. I wanted to hurt him. I wanted him to feel a fraction of the agony that was ripping me apart. You stole my choice, Liam. I cried, my voice cracking. You knew what this meant, and you didn't give me a choice. I don't know what I would have done. Maybe we could have adopted. Maybe we could have used a donor. We had options. But you took them all away from me because you couldn't face the truth. He just stood there and took it, his face a mask of misery. You're right, he said quietly. You're right about all of it. I am a coward. And I am selfish. And I have destroyed everything. There's nothing I can say that will ever make it right. No, there isn't, I said, my voice dropping back to a lethal calm. I wiped my tears away with the back of my hand. There is nothing you can say. I turned my back on him, a deliberate final gesture. I focused all my attention on Leo. I gently lifted him from the bassinet, my movements slow and careful. He was so light, so warm. He stirred in my arms, his little mouth making sucking motions in his sleep. I brought him to my chest, cradling his head in the crook of my arm, inhaling his scent, trying to absorb his purity, to shield him from the toxic truth that now filled the room. He's so beautiful, Liam whispered from behind me, his voice choked. Don't you dare, I hissed, not turning around. Don't you dare pretend this is a normal, happy moment. You don't get to have this. You forfeited that right when you decided to lie. I could hear his ragged breathing. I could feel the weight of his despair. but I couldn't find a single drop of pity for him in my heart. All my softness, all my empathy, had been burned away, leaving only a hard, protective shell around me and my son. For a long time, there was only silence, punctuated by the soft sounds of Leo's breathing and the distant, muted hum of the hospital. The man I had married stood a few feet behind me, a stranger. The life I had cherished was in ruins around me, and in my arms, I held both the reason for my heartbreak and the only reason to go on. Finally, I spoke again, my voice devoid of all emotion. "I want you to leave. Alara, please. Leave," I repeated, my voice like flint. "Call your parents and tell them not to come. I don't want to see them. I don't want to see any of you. Just go." "Where will I go?" he asked, his voice small and lost. "I don't care," I said, and the most terrifying part was that I meant it. "Go to a hotel. Go to your brother's house. Go to hell for all I care. But you are not staying here. This room is for me and my son." There was another long, stretched-out silence. I heard a shuffling sound, the sound of defeat, the click of the door opening, and then closing with a soft, final thud. And I was alone. The strength that had fueled my rage drained away, leaving me weak and trembling. I sank back against the pillows, clutching my son to my chest as if he were a life raft. The tears came again, but these were different. They weren't hot with anger, but cold with the chilling reality of my new existence. I was a mother, and I was utterly, completely alone. I looked down at Leo's sleeping face. His tiny brow furrowed, as if even in his dreams he could sense the sorrow that surrounded him. His life would not be the one I had dreamed of. There would be no easy, sunlit path. His future was now a terrifying map of unknowns, marked with doctor's appointments, genetic counselors, and the looming specter of a disease I couldn't even comprehend. I thought of the name we had chosen. Leo. Lion-hearted. I had thought it was a beautiful, strong name. Now it felt like a tragic prophecy. He would need the heart of a lion to endure the life his father had condemned him to, and I would have to find the strength to help him fight. I bent my head and pressed my lips to his forehead. It was the first kiss I had given him since the world had ended. It was a kiss of fierce, unending love. And it was a promise that no matter what, he would not face this alone. I was his mother. The lie had made me a single warrior instead of part of a loving team, but I would be a warrior nonetheless. For him, my beautiful, broken boy, my son.